This is a response to a couple of videos that were made in response to my video called I and We. One by Professor Anton, one by TheStyzor. Hi guys. I'll start off with an apology, which is not a bad place to start. But I didn't make notes of either of your videos, and I'm kind of working on memory of them. And I have to say, I wasn't kind of fully there when I was watching them. You know, I had a bit of trouble concentrating. So as I say, I'm working mostly on my intuitions of what I think you were saying, which are probably complete misreading, so apologies for that for a start off. But some things came through, at least from my memory of them, to do with otherness, to do with being a stranger, to do with the relationship between self and other, and whether it's possible to have this word we makes any sense without a they. I don't know really. Just in terms of that latter thing, whether we makes sense without a they. I mean, when I think about that, I kind of face the same logical conundrum that I face when I imagine the expanding universe. You know what I mean? When people talk about the Big Bang and the expanding universe, your intuition just cries out, well, what's it expanding into? I mean, even though we know that it wasn't expanding into anything, that it was space itself that was expanding, and the horizon of that expanding space isn't a horizon that's got anything beyond it. Even though I know that, my intuitions still want there to be a space beyond that. So the same kind of thing arises here. When I have that expanding frame, that expanding horizon of who we are, I have to think to myself, well, yes, on the one hand I want there to be a they, the kind of space of there that I'm expanding into, but at the same time I want to work the same kind of conceptual magic that you do when you imagine the Big Bang, and you have to think, well, that's just an accident of conceptualization. There doesn't really need to be a space for space to expand into, and there doesn't really need to be a they for we to expand into. That's just a kind of trick I'm playing on my own thought processes with that. I am imagining a we which can be total, possibly unachievable, but nevertheless as an aspirational goal, that ultimate horizon of we which includes everybody, a kind of personified universe, if you like. I do find at least interesting enough to hang on to for the time being. In the same way, and I think this is what you were saying, Corey, is that it's of course it's kind of impossible to imagine an ultimately reduced I, an ultimately located I. You know, you keep going inwards, and of course it's full of the trappings of being, isn't it? Wherever you look, there you are, with all the baggage that you bring with you. But at least the direction, that shedding of different kind of layers of civilization and acculturization and education and what's that word that comes from Althusser I was talking about, interpolation, those kind of shedding those layers of that does at least suggest a trajectory towards something that isn't a thing, it's a point in space, you know, a point in space and time of the universe or something anyway. But either way, it doesn't necessarily mean it exists. It could be a hypothetical point. That's just all I was getting at, really, just the idea of that, which I quite like. So that's something there about strangeness and otherness. But in terms of this stranger thing, you know, in a sense we are, partly because of what I've been saying, you know, whenever you look, there you are. Whenever you say the word I, that's who you're not, because you're saying it. You're turning yourself into an utterance, or yourself has been realised as an utterance. There's the word I, there's the symbol on the page, there's the sound wave in the air, and that's not I, you're already out there in the world, aren't you? You're already cast forward into the world, and looking and trying, you know, so that's not you, so that's the I that's trying to see you, and it's always a backward glance. You're always retreating from yourself, aren't you, in that way? In the way that Drew Leder talks about. I know you know Drew Leder, Corey. If you get the chance, TheStyzor, you might want to look at Drew Leder. It's a great book called The Absent Body, I think it's called, something like that. I did find a free version available online, Drew Leder. It's quite good. But he talks about, you know, about the existence, about what it's like to be alive and awake, be conscious. It's always as if we're cast forward into the world, eccentric from ourselves. You know, eccentric in the way that the rim of a spinning plate is eccentric to its centre. It's no longer in the centre, it's outside of the centre. Cast forward, you know, we're already rushing headlong onto the road ahead, leaving ourselves behind. And even though we keep casting an eye back, trying to see ourselves, we're always playing Red Queen catch-up, aren't we? That way. So we're always a stranger to ourselves, you know what I mean? That eye, the eye which is this contentless point, this location in space almost, hypothetical though it might be, or I don't know, corresponding to some kind of very simple biological process. Wherever that is, we're always not that. We're always strange to that. That's always strange to us. And there's something both kind of gorgeous and horrifying about that, isn't there? You know, I guess I'm thinking about the existentialists and the existential stranger that comes up in Camus, who has to kind of live in that kind of existential strangeness, detached from nature, detached from meaning, detached from selfhood, really, detached from thingness, detached from everything, really, cast forward into the world, and trying to make sense of that, you know, when there is no sense to be made of it, because you can't stand still long enough to make sense of it, really. You're cast out of the garden almost, you know what I mean? I often think that the fall from grace, the story of of Adam and Eve's expulsion from the garden, that's a kind of mythological retelling in some ways, I think, for that development of that kind of consciousness that we have, that's capable of language and capable of saying I, and has this knowledge of not only of, has knowledge of good and evil, you know, has knowledge of it doesn't just participate in the world, but observes the world backwards over its shoulder, constantly observing the mess that it's made, and unable to go back and fix the things that have been broken, like the angel. So that fall from grace is a kind of expulsion, isn't it? You know, the garden is always behind us in that sense, and we're cast out, strangers in a strange land. But then again, there's that great phrase in the, I guess this is more what you were talking about, TheStyzor, that great phrase in the Jim Morrison song, where, you know, people are strange. I think you say that quite a few times, people are strange. People are strange when you're a stranger, faces seem ugly when you're alone, women are wicked when you're unwanted, streets are uneven when you're down. And he's talking about what it is to be alone, I guess. But it's a very kind of romantic aloneness in Jim Morrison, isn't it? You know, and Jim Morrison cast himself, and was absolutely cast, as a kind of Rambo romantic figure, uniquely sensitive to the world, uniquely sensitive to the garden and what was happening in the undergrowth, and how evil a lot of it was, as well as good. And being cast out and becoming a stranger as a result of that, being strange to himself, and along with that, a lot of that kind of romantic tradition of Rambo and the romantic poets, and forward into, and also people like Van Gogh, but also, as I say, Jim Morrison himself, kind of cast in that role as someone who was just a little bit too sensitive to this world, couldn't really live in this world, because their eyes have been opened, because they have seen their nakedness. You know, and it's too fragile. It's just the lights are too bright in this world. We're rushing forward too fast. We can't stand it out here in the garden. We don't have the firmament, the cover of the firmament around us. We don't have the city walls around us any longer. We are kind of naked and alone out there. You know what I mean? Cast eccentrically into the world. And you know, and Jim Morrison did the classic romantic trajectory of someone who's either sees himself in that position or is placed in that position as a kind of cultural type, and you know, comes to a tragic end. You know, that's the traditional end for those who show us what strangers look like, show us what we look like as strangers in one particular formulation. Personally, I find it a bit romantic, but yeah, I don't know if I've really addressed either of your videos there, you two, but yeah, I mean, someone in the comments mentioned thou. I think it was Dana Garrett, You and I have talked about I and thou a couple of times there, Corey. It's a book by Martin Buber, and the word thou, which doesn't really mean you, it means the kind of you that also includes a certain kind of me as well in it. So it's not I and you, it's I and thou. And when I say thou, you're implicated in that, whoever you are and whoever I say it to. And it's a thou which can also include the inanimate. Martin Buber talks about it in relation to art, I think, at one point also. Don't know if how helpful that is. But it's hard, isn't it, this stuff? Being alive, driving. Anyway, thanks very much.